Imagine this, it's 2:37 a.m. You're wide awake, your heart's beating faster than it should. Not because of excitement, but because of fear. Not because you're inspired, but because your mind is under siege. A single negative thought crept in, and now it's spiraling, multiplying, infecting every corner of your consciousness. You're not weak, you're not broken. You're experiencing what every brain is biologically wired to do. But here's the difference between those who spiral and those who rise: awareness and protocol. Most people think negative thoughts are a psychological issue, something to be solved with willpower or positive thinking. But neuroscience says otherwise. Negative thoughts aren't random. They're a pattern, a deeply embedded neural loop, reinforced by repetition, cortisol, and a lack of deliberate interruption. Your brain doesn't care if the thought is true, it cares if it's familiar. Familiarity is safety, and the brain will always choose familiar pain over unfamiliar peace. Here's the truth: you cannot just think your way out of negative thought spirals. You have to physiologically disrupt them. The first thing you need to understand is the role of the autonomic nervous system. When you have a negative thought, especially one tied to fear, regret, or shame, your body shifts into a sympathetic state, fight or flight. Your pupils dilate, your breathing changes, your focus narrows, and here's the key: you lose access to rational decision-making. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles logic, planning, and perspective, goes offline. So you're not crazy for thinking irrational things in that state. You're just running an old survival script. So how do you stop this? You intervene with behavioral physiology before psychology. Double inhale through the nose, long exhale through the mouth. It's not a gimmick, it's a physiological sigh. It's the fastest way to bring your autonomic nervous system back into balance. When your body calms, your brain follows. Then and only then can you implement cognitive override. This is where protocols come in. Write the thought down, not to honor it, but to expose it. Put it on paper so it stops looping in the background of your mental operating system. Ask yourself, is this true? Is this useful? Is this serving any adaptive function? 99% of the time, the answer is no. It's static. No's. A corrupted file being run on a stressed-out machine. Now let's go deeper. Neuroplasticity is the ability of your brain to rewire itself. Every time you interrupt a negative thought with action, a breath, a walk, a spoken counter-statement, you weaken the old pathway and strengthen a new one. And over time, you don't just stop the negative thoughts. You rewire your default. You go from being reactive to proactive, from spiraling to ascending. There's no switch to flip, no single hack. It's repetition. It's the daily choice to intervene at the level of biology and reinforce at the level of behavior. The people you admire for being mentally strong, they're not free of negative thoughts. They're just better at catching the first one before it becomes a storm. So next time it hits you, when your mind tells you you're not good enough, that it's too late, that you'll fail again, you don't fight it with force. You bring it to light, you interrupt it, you breathe, and then you act. Most people misunderstand the origin of negative thoughts. They think these thoughts come from weakness, poor mindset, or lack of discipline. But that's not how the human brain works. Negative thoughts are biologically driven. They're a feature of evolution, not a flaw in your character. Your brain is hardwired to detect threats, real or imagined, and prioritize them over everything else. That negativity bias kept our ancestors alive when danger lurked behind every shadow. But in modern life, that same bias gets hijacked by abstract fears, failure, rejection, uncertainty. The result? Your brain treats a critical email, a missed opportunity, or a memory from 10 years ago, as if a predator is in the room. That's why a single thought can trigger a cascade of anxiety or shame. It's not that you're broken, it's that your nervous system is doing exactly what it evolved to do: keep you safe by over-focusing on what might go wrong. The mistake is believing that every signal your brain sends is a signal you have to obey. Your brain isn't designed to prioritize truth, it's designed to prioritize survival. That means it will latch onto what's familiar, not necessarily what's accurate. If you've been thinking negatively for weeks, months, or even years, those thought patterns become ingrained neural circuits. Your brain recognizes them like well-worn trails in a forest. So even if a thought is destructive, like "I'm not good enough," or "this will never work," your brain chooses it. because it's been there before. It's efficient, it's known, and the brain always chooses known pain over unknown peace. This is why affirmations often fail at first, because they feel unfamiliar. The neural pathways for self-doubt are stronger, more practiced, but once you understand that your brain is running a pattern, not delivering truth, you stop negotiating with the thought. You stop arguing with it. Instead, you redirect. You carve a new trail, not by force, but by repetition, precision, and consistency. When a negative thought enters your mind, especially one rooted in fear, regret, or failure, it doesn't just stay in your head. It kicks off a full-body response. The sympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system lights up, adrenaline surges. Your pupils dilate, your heart rate accelerates, your visual field narrows, and most importantly, your prefrontal cortex, the rational, planning, decision-making part of your brain, goes partially offline. You're not in a reflective state anymore. You're in survival mode, and in that state, your brain isn't interested in nuance or long-term thinking. It's scanning for immediate threats, even if those threats are just thoughts. That's why you can't reason your way out of a spiral while you're in it. The hardware for rational thinking is temporarily downregulated. You're not weak for reacting emotionally. You're neurobiologically wired to do so. The key is to recognize that the feeling isn't who you are. It's simply a shift in state, and state can be changed quickly once you understand the mechanics. This is where most people get it wrong. They try to outthink a stress response. They try to solve a physiological state with cognitive tools alone, affirmations, logic, positive self-talk. But if your body is in a state of threat, those tools won't land. It's like trying to update software while the power's out. You cannot access rational thought until you bring your nervous system back to baseline. And that means starting with the body. Thought follows state. If your body is tense, if your breath is shallow, if your heart is racing, your brain will default to threat-based narratives. It's not about lack of willpower. It's biology. You have to downshift your internal state before your brain becomes available for higher-level processing. That's the sequence: physiology first, psychology second. The moment you feel yourself slipping into negative thought loops, the first move isn't to reason, it's to regulate. Because the truth is, you can't solve a fight-or-flight response with thinking. You solve it with biology. So how do you regulate? You start with something deceptively simple but deeply powerful: the physiological sigh. This isn't a trick, it's not a relaxation gimmick. It's a hardwired tool built into your nervous system to recalibrate your internal state fast. 2 quick inhales through the nose, 1 deep, followed by a second, shorter top-up, and then a long, extended exhale through the mouth. What that does is offload carbon dioxide efficiently and signals your brain and body that the threat has passed. It's the fastest, non-pharmacological way to shift out of a sympathetic, stress-driven state and into a more balanced parasympathetic mode. This is what allows your prefrontal cortex to come back online. Suddenly, you're not reacting, you're observing. You're not inside the thought, you're watching it. That shift might take 10 seconds, but it changes everything. Because once you have control over your physiological state, you have leverage over your mind. Without that shift, every tool you try to use, journaling, reframing, reflecting, will be filtered through the lens of threat. But when your body signals safety, your brain starts working for you, not against you. Now that you've shifted your physiological state, you need to interrupt the thought itself. And one of the most powerful ways to do this is by writing the negative thought down. The act of externalizing the thought, putting it on paper, takes it out of your internal loop and forces your brain to engage with it from a different angle. It no longer has the power to rattle around aimlessly in your mind. It's on the page, separate from you. And this small action is incredibly important because it exposes the irrationality of many of our negative thoughts. Often when you write something down, you realize just how exaggerated or disconnected from reality it is. Your mind is constantly running simulations, and many of them are fear-based projections that are rarely true. By seeing the thought in front of you, you force your brain to confront it, and that alone is often enough to start breaking the pattern. You might even notice that once it's written down, you stop taking it so seriously. That's because your brain's ability to catastrophize begins to lose its grip when you break the cycle and put the thought into the real world, where you can evaluate it more objectively. This simple act of writing is a tool for mental clarity. It's not about validating the thought, but about separating yourself from it and bringing it into the light. Once you've written the thought down, the next step is to critically examine it. This is where the real mental work happens. You need to ask yourself, is this thought true? Because 99% of the time, the answer is no. Our brains are quick to generate thoughts, but they don't always have the full picture. They often lack the nuance or context that would allow us to assess a situation accurately. Negative thoughts are, more often than not, based on distorted perceptions, exaggerations, assumptions, or worst-case scenarios. We think in all or nothing terms, or we catastrophize and make a mountain out of a molehill. By questioning the validity of these thoughts, you pull them into the realm of reason. Is it true that you're a failure just because you made one mistake? Is it accurate to assume that you'll never be good enough, based on an isolated incident or fear of the future? When you force your mind to stop and challenge the thought, you begin to reframe it. Instead of letting it control you, you start gaining control over it. You create a gap between stimulus and response, where your rational mind can step in and apply perspective. You start seeing the thought not as a fact, but as just a mental event, temporary, not permanent. This mental reframing doesn't happen automatically, but with repetition, it rewires your brain to question and challenge destructive narratives. And the more you do it, the more you realize that these negative thoughts are often nothing more than noise. Nothing to fear, nothing to accept. The power to change negative thought patterns doesn't come from willpower alone. It comes from something much deeper and more permanent: neuroplasticity. The human brain is constantly rewiring itself based on the experiences you create. Every time you interrupt a negative thought and replace it with something more constructive, whether through a breath, a positive action, or simply questioning its validity, you are physically reshaping the neural circuits that support that thought pattern. It's like you're carving a new path in the brain, one that leads away from negativity and toward more adaptive, rational responses. Neuroplasticity doesn't require perfection, it just requires consistency. If you can repeat the act of disrupting a negative thought over and over, you'll start to see that your brain will naturally begin to favor the healthier thought patterns. This rewiring isn't instant, it's cumulative, gradual, and builds on itself. But over time, your brain becomes less reactive to those negative loops, because it's learned a new way to respond. What was once an automatic thought, a default hardwired pathway, becomes a road less traveled. In its place, the brain strengthens the new neural pathways you've intentionally created. So every time you stop a negative thought in its tracks and choose a more productive one, you're not just managing your thoughts, you're rewiring your brain for a more positive, resilient future. The most crucial moment in dealing with negative thoughts is when they first appear. It's in the initial seconds when your brain starts to spin that you have the most power to intervene. If you let that thought take root, even for just a few moments, it will gather momentum. The more you ruminate, the more it becomes part of your internal narrative, and soon it's no longer a single thought, it's a full-blown emotional state, often tied to a physical reaction. This is why stopping the first thought is so critical. It's much easier to nip it in the bud than to try and deal with it after it's spiraled into something overwhelming. The longer you allow the thought to linger, the more entrenched it becomes in your brain's circuitry, and the more you'll reinforce that neural pathway. The key here is awareness, catching the thought at its inception, before it can set off that cascade of emotions and body reactions. And this is where practice comes in. It's like catching a ball in midair before it hits the ground. The faster you recognize and disrupt the thought, the easier it is to regain control. The sooner you intervene, the less likely you are to go down the rabbit hole of negative thinking. By learning to recognize that first signal and act immediately, you create a habit of awareness and control. And over time, this becomes less of a fight and more of an automatic response. The real danger in negative thoughts isn't the thoughts themselves, it's in doing nothing about them. The most destructive thing you can do is ignore the negative thoughts or wait for them to somehow pass on their own. When you let a thought fester and do nothing, you're reinforcing the very neural pathways that keep you stuck in that cycle. You're allowing your brain to run on autopilot, making decisions based on fear, doubt, and old, outdated patterns. This is where inaction becomes your enemy. Because here's the thing, your brain is going to keep generating thoughts. It's just part of being human. But what you do with those thoughts, how you interact with them, determines whether they spiral into something harmful or become something you can manage. If you allow the thought to go unchecked, it gains strength. It builds momentum. You might not even notice how much it's impacting you until it's too late. The longer you wait to act, the more that negative thought becomes your reality. But when you take immediate action, whether it's breathing, writing the thought down, or questioning its truth, you interrupt that momentum. And in doing so, you create a new pathway. So the real threat isn't the thought itself, it's in the paralysis that comes from inaction. Action is the antidote, and the sooner you implement it, the faster you break the cycle and regain control over your mind and your life.